Horror Story. Title: The Strange Book. Main story: Arthur Logan had always been a brilliant writer, his horror novels causing chills down the spine of all who read them. However, his talent turned into a living nightmare when his latest book, The Shadows in the Woods, started to come alive. Arthur had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. Strange, shadowy figures began to emerge from the pages of his book, crawling out of the ink and onto the walls of his study. At first, Arthur tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination, that he was simply overworked and tired. But then he noticed something even more terrifying: the figures were coming to life in the real world. They were taking the form of people he knew, including his wife Michelle. One night, as Arthur sat at his desk, writing furiously in an attempt to finish his latest book, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He turned around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the shadows began to swirl around him, wrapping him up in a cocoon of darkness. When he emerged from the shadows, Arthur found himself in a world beyond his imagination. He was standing in the middle of a dark forest, with strange, shadowy figures looming over him. They seemed to be taking their orders from a hooded figure, their movements jerky and unnatural. Arthur realized with horror that he was not alone. Michelle was there with him, her eyes wide with fear. The two of them clung to each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. As they made their way through the dark forest, they encountered all manner of strange and terrifying creatures. There were giant spiders with legs as thick as trees, and winged beasts that swooped down from the sky. They had to fight for their lives, using whatever weapons they could find to defend themselves. Finally, after what seemed like days, they came to a clearing in the forest. In the center of the clearing stood a great, black tower, its walls slick with darkness. They knew instinctively that this was their destination, and they made their way towards it. As they climbed the tower, they encountered even more horrors. Ghostly apparitions floated past them, and strange, writhing creatures lurked in the shadows. They had to fight their way through each level, using all their skills to stay alive. When they finally reached the top of the tower, they found themselves face to face with the hooded figure. It was Arthur's own creation, the villain of his latest book. The figure spoke to them in a voice like dry bones, telling them that they had been chosen to live out the rest of their days in this world of shadows. But Arthur was not about to let his creation win. He and Michelle fought back with all their might, using everything they had learned along the way. In the end, they were able to defeat the hooded figure and banish the shadows back to their own world. As they emerged from the tower, Arthur and Michelle were covered in cuts and bruises, their clothes torn and ragged. But they were alive, and they knew that they had saved their own lives, and perhaps the lives of countless others. From that day on, Arthur Logan never wrote another horror novel. He knew that the line between fiction and reality was a thin one, and he never wanted to tempt fate again. But the memories of his adventure stayed with him, a reminder of the power of imagination, and the dangers that lay in wait for those who dared to cross the line. Arthur and Michelle made their way back to their home in California, but they knew that their lives would never be the same. They couldn't help but feel like they were being watched, like the shadows were still lurking around every corner, waiting to pounce. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. But even as time passed, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still not right. They tried to put their experience behind them, but they couldn't ignore the strange occurrences that seemed to follow them wherever they went. One night, as they were sitting in their living room, watching TV, they heard a soft scratching at the front door. They exchanged a look, both of them knowing that this was no ordinary noise. Slowly, Arthur got up from the couch and made his way to the door. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, and he wondered if he was ready to face whatever lay on the other side. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with a shadowy figure. It was one of the creatures from his book, its eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. Follow the story on the next episode.